I texted you about this, but it's like every week someone comes up, have you heard of Clayton and Natalie Morris and their show Redacted? I'm like, yeah, I know them. You know them? It's
you're very
so
sweet.
Cool. I am a fan of your show, let me just say. And not just because I agree with everything, but because, which I do, but because there's just so much information. I love it. So congratulations to you.
Well, very, very sweet of you. Very, very kind of you to say. And that's a very Tucker thing to do when all the news is about Tucker and the big story is about Tucker Carlson and the launch of this new network, to turn it around on someone else. So I know this must be difficult for you because there's so much focus on you right now, and you're not comfortable with that. You love covering the news. You love covering other people. You love covering other stories. And so, you know, it's amazing to me to see you launch this network. What was this gestational process like for you kicking off this network?
Well, I mean, it was ideological. As you know, one of the big differences between you and me is, you know, you guys are good at business. I'm not. I'm not interested. I don't think about it. My brain doesn't work that way. Kind of the last thing I want to do is start a business and think about that kind of thing. But it just dawned on me, based on my own experiences, including recent ones, that, you know, you really need to be protected if you have a shot of saying what you really think is true, particularly in the coming 12 months, which is, I mean, it's the most intense period, and not just in this country, but around the world. I mean, lots of places are changing dramatically. The whole world is reshuffling, and there's going to be a lot of pressure to shut people down because the information war is the real war, of course. Words are more powerful in the end than, you know, anything Raytheon sells, and more enduring. So they're going to try and stop people from noting obvious truths about what's happening, and if you want to be one of the few who is able to say what he thinks, you cannot be dependent on advertisers or big companies. You just can't. And that means you have to set up some kind of system that pays for a fortress of reporters and that is, you know, immune to advertiser pressure. You know, it's just essential, and that means subscriptions, basically.
Right.
Right, but what scares me about doing something like that, also, hello, haven't said hello myself, long time no talk.
Hey, Natalie.
How are you?
It's great to see you.
Yeah, you always call me Mrs. Morris, so thanks for calling me Natalie on the show. So one of the things that bothers me about doing something like that, which I guess you've sort of fortified your backbone about, is that when you have a platform now that is practicing free speech, the government tries to penetrate it with litigation or subpoenas and, you know, so it's from the outside in. So are you afraid of that kind of thing, of being attacked like we've seen just this week now, government going after Twitter, asking them about how they're protecting misinformation around abortion and that kind of thing? So what'd you do to get ready for that?
I mean, I say my prayers every morning, take a sauna, try to spend time with my wife and dogs and kids. You know, I mean, those are things that you kind of can't prepare yourself for ahead of time. You know, have a ready pool of cash for legal defense, of course. But really, it's inside you. Are you the sort of person who's going to get beaten down and give up? And so you need to keep yourself strong inside, not to over dramatize. But I do think a lot is at stake. And you're absolutely right that the government is one of the driving forces behind censorship, and it's always through proxies and cutouts. That's what happened to Alex Jones. I mean, the FBI was all over that, you know, that suit, that civil suit against him that resulted in the $1 billion judgment that for a while almost put him out of business. I mean, that didn't happen in a vacuum, sorry. And so, yeah, they have a lot of ways of doing it, and doubtless they'll try. But of course, I mean, but the other thing is I've already been through some of that. Or quite a bit of it, actually. And so I'm certainly not intimidated. Maybe they'll succeed, but it's not going to stop me from talking. I mean, if it gets to the point where I'm like, you know, standing downtown with a bullhorn, okay, that's where we are. But I think we have an obligation to say what we think is true. I personally have a burning need to do that. I can't respect myself if I don't. And so I'm not going to stop. But God knows what's going to happen in the next year, honestly. I mean, you both can feel it. Every person who's paying any attention at all can feel it. There are all these unresolvable conflicts that are coming to a head in the same year.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a huge concern for me.
Yeah.
Well, you've got Israel, you've got Ukraine. I mean, you've got you've got the election, you've got the southern border, you've got child trafficking. I mean, there's a whole host of stories that seem very, very
existential.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think back to our time at Fox, and of course you and I got to anchor a show together, co-host a show together. And I'm thinking about the stories that we get to cover now. Are there any stories where you feel like, oh my God, I wouldn't have been able to cover this back then? Or do you feel in some ways liberated by not having the shackles of sort of billionaires that are, kind of controlling the puppet masters behind? Like, are there any specific stories or things you're feeling and liberated in that way?
But you guys were never talking about things like that, like, oh, too bad they don't let us say this. It's almost like you weren't aware of it until you were, which makes me right now.
That is okay.
Yeah. Now I'm Anna
What you
Clinton.
said, that's so insightful. No, but that's what you're saying is so insightful and true, and I couldn't quite put it into the words, but you just did. It's not that, I mean, Clayton and I talked endlessly about the company that we worked for. We spent a lot of time together, of course, and I don't remember either one of us ever saying, gosh, I really want to say this, but I can't. It was more like you don't imagine that certain things, or I'll speak for myself, I could not imagine that certain things could possibly be true. And I felt like I was more open-minded than most people. Clayton certainly was. He was doing UFO research in commercial breaks. So, I think we were more open-minded than a lot of people. But again, speaking for myself, I just couldn't, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds kind of crazy. And I don't know, I just didn't go there in my own head. And now I look back at that period, so it would have been 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, and there was a lot going on, and I'm revisiting some of those stories from that time and thinking, wait a second, the wackos, or the people I thought were wackos, were really onto something. And maybe not the whole story, but there's definitely something there. And I'll just give you one example, which is and I was writing about it this morning in a piece that we're doing on Julian Assange, who we visited in prison. The emails from the DNC in 2016 that showed that the Hillary campaign had rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders, who had popular support, grassroots support. She did not. She was fully AstroTurf corporate candidate. And they told us that Russia stole those emails. Well, that's not true. And it was kind of obvious at the time that it wasn't true. Bill Binney did a big piece on this in The Nation. Like, as a tech matter, that couldn't have happened. So someone from inside the building leaked those to WikiLeaks, and Assange has effectively said the same thing. So, like, what is that? So there was all this energy invested in convincing the rest of us that Russia did it, that it did not come from within the DNC, and just shut up. You're crazy. You're a conspiracy nut. And they were lying. So what does that mean? Why were they lying? What were they hiding? Something. And so that's the story. And I don't know the answers to all of those questions, but I do know they were lying. I do know Russia didn't do it. And so, I wish I'd spent a lot more time on that story, for example, at the time, but I didn't.
One of the things that strikes me so much about that period, and I was at NBC and you guys were at Fox, is that we were fighting over racism and gender, about whether or not the media was being unfair to Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton. Exactly. And if Fox, and if the right, or any media that supported the right, really wanted to go after the establishment on the left, why did they leave the war crimes on the table? And so that's what makes me realize that it is two sides of the same coin, because you could have picked up the fact that Obama droned more people in the Middle East than any of his predecessors, the fact that Hillary Clinton was starting wars.
And he won a Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Why were we so busy with race and gender? Why did, and that's what kills me so much, is that if they really wanted to go after the establishment left, why leave all the war? Why leave all the blood on the floor?
Well, I couldn't agree more. And of course, I mean, they do it because conversations about race particularly incite animal fears in people and make them unreasonable immediately. But the truth is that the differences between races, which are real, are not that big. But other differences are big. And the difference between someone who makes $1 billion and a person who makes $50,000 a year, those are much bigger than the difference between the races. Okay, that's just true. And so it is, to some extent, a cover for the crimes of a few when they, gin up race hatred among the population, which they are absolutely doing. That's not organic. I never walk down, I live in this country, I've always lived here. I never walk down, no one ever yells at me because of my race, ever. And I just don't, like, the level of actual racial hostility, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, between the races in the United States is so much lower than they're constantly pretending it is, just in day-to-day life. I know you felt the same way. You don't see people getting in fistfights because they're different colors. What?
Right.
But if you watched only NBC or these channels, you would think that was the state of play in the United States. It's not. And so they're telling you that to divert your attention from the wars, which I actually have been passionately against since I went to Iraq in '03, but not enough, I agree with you, but also from the financial crimes. So you can like invent a fake cryptocurrency and steal, billions of dollars from a million separate individual investors and give some to your parents to buy beachfront property in the Bahamas. And it's not that big a story. Well, in my view, that's a really big story. That's a huge story. Like what the Federal Reserve prints all this money, trillions of dollars. They have a permanent emergency for over 10 years. 0 interest rates. Where does all that money go? So the Fed prints the money. What happens then? Well, it goes to a select number of banks, which have, encoded in regulation, have a special deal where they just get rich no matter what. Well, why is that fair? And by the way, why are we taxing people double for working? You pay half the taxes if you invest as you do if you work. So are we saying investing is twice as virtuous as working? I mean, that's like an actual debate we should have, but we don't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because we're mad about race. So yeah, I totally think we've been had. Totally.
Well, you're going to really piss off Al Gore. Al Gore this weekend said that the mainstream media is really your source for news and information. And if you're alternative media, then of course that's misinformation, and we really need to clamp down on that. The alternative media, the free media, the independent media, that's where you get into trouble. I mean, I'm just thinking about the cornucopia of stories that you've covered that the alternative media covers that the mainstream media doesn't even touch. For instance, why did a lot of people get rich or trade stocks before the October 7th attack? That's a good question. How did people know about that and made lots of money off of that? We could run down the 9/11 story.
And who were those people, by the way?
Right.
That's what I like.
Wouldn't you love to know?
Who were they? Yeah, I would. How about what country were they in? No, I agree with you completely.
So alternative media is seen as, of course, a major threat, and the independent media is seen as a major threat. When you look at, you've been in the belly of the beast. You worked at CNN. You worked at MSNBC. Of course, you worked at Fox as well. Do you see a massive disconnect between the mainstream media and what alternative media is able to cover these days?
Well, I just think it's dying, and the audience numbers show it. I mean, for one thing, in addition to all of the other sins, and by the way, running cover for the most powerful people in your society and pretending you're not doing it, that is a sin, just to be clear. But in addition to that, on a non-moral level, just as a viewer, it's very boring to be, and it's boring for a specific reason. So if I have a mission in what I'm telling you, if the whole point of my telling you this is to convince you of something specific, right? If it's the definition of propaganda, I have to keep repeating it endlessly. I can't sort of veer off into something I find interesting, like how did they build the pyramids? I'm probably not going to get into that because my job is to convince you that Zelensky is Churchill, and so that's all I'm going to talk about, or that whatever it is, whatever the lie is. And so they wind up repeating like the same 4 stories forever. January 6th was a white supremacist insurrection. Okay. Okay, I disagree. I don't think you're right. But if you tell me that every single day for 3 years, not only does your propaganda fail, with me anyway, because I'm like, why are they telling me this again? But you also drive me off because you're boring me to death. Like, I want to hear something else. I want to hear something interesting. I want curious people gathering my news. Curiosity is the key to the news business. And that's what I always loved about you, Clayton. We'd sit there and you'd be like, can you believe this? Of course, none of it ever made air, but you were like so excited about the thing, about your like intellectual journey in your own head. And that's a prerequisite for journalism. Like, you have to be that kind of person. Like, wait, what a second. Wait, what? How'd that happen? What do you mean? You know what I mean? And they're the opposite of that. They're like, shut up, we know how it happened, and if you ask any questions about how it happened, then you're insane. It's like, no, I'm not insane. Or maybe I'm insane, but it's still a fair question. Do you know what I mean? So like, no one wants to watch that shit, actually. It's stultifying, and their numbers are in such steep decline that NBC News is not going to exist in 10 years. There's no chance. And programs like yours, I checked your numbers as I was sitting waiting to go on, it's like, they're ridiculous. They're huge. And who would have predicted that, actually?
Right.
You just like, you know, get in a studio with your wife and talk about things you think are interesting, and all of a sudden you've got like a lot of people, you know, my next door neighbor's watching you every day. Who in the world? No, I'm serious though. Who could have predicted that 10 years ago? You'd be like, no, Clayton and his wife have gone off the deep end and they're like talking to themselves in this weird little closet. No. The world is watching them. And that's the model. I'm not joking. Like, it's crazy. It's what's happening now. Last thing I'll say is the promise of the internet originally. The promise originally was, you know, everyone gets a voice. You get to hear all kinds of perspectives. That kind of died for a while. We're hearing one perspective, and it reached its peak when they took Parler off the internet. And now I really think it's reemerging because that other stuff is just, its era has passed, in my opinion.
But I'm scared every day of the things that we talk about, and I realize that the stories that we cover give me politics by cooties. And I realized that I would be non grata in my...
But cooties?
Well, yeah, that's what it is, right? Because I'm willing to ask questions about the COVID vaccines. I'm willing to read books about Ukraine's history. I'm willing to spend my weekends doing that, which gives me politics by cooties, which I know now that in the circles I ran in when I was still in the mainstream media would make me seem like a kook. And I'm afraid not only of losing those friendships, but I'm afraid of the fallout that happens around that, things that happen to people that I respect. But at the same time, I care more about the world that we leave our kids, and you can't say nothing right now.
Amen.
And so that's the reason that we do this, even though I'm always scared. I mean, you and Clayton don't seem as scared as me.
No, I wanted to ask you that question. Are there stories you're scared to cover? Because there'll be times, and I know you are hit with a torrent of information on a daily basis, way more than I am. And I mean, you have contacts all around the world that are, you know, there's probably someone on the space station right now texting you with information about something. And so are there things that you're scared to cover? You're sitting there saying, wow, this is like soul crushing, like to the point where like it really scares you in your soul.
There are two. Yes, there are two. One is the 2020 election. And I think that I was far too dismissive of some of the claims made about it. And I think there may be some merit to some of the wildest possible claims about that election. And I haven't proven it yet, but I've, you know, look, I'll just say, and you know this, of course, very well, both of you, that whenever you have politics, you've got a lot of sleazy people and liars and people who just want to get their candidate elected or get paid or whatever. You've got a lot of lying around all political campaigns, so it's very hard to know what's true. And sometimes it takes years to figure it out. So there were a lot of stupid mercenaries making claims about fraud in that past election that were, you know, they couldn't back up. But that doesn't mean that all of those ideas were wrong, and I think that some of them were right, is what I'm learning, and I'll just leave it there. The second thing that bothers me is the UFO story, and the more you dig into that and talk to people with actual knowledge of it, again, that's another story where there are some, fanciful ideas floating around that are just, there's no evidence that they're true. But if you talk to people who, have actual knowledge of it that they gathered themselves, there are parts of that story that I do not understand at all that are really, really, really dark. It's so dark that I, haven't told my wife about it. I mean, I haven't verified any of this, but this is not just stuff that I read on the internet. I know you all are very, very grounded in that story, so I think I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But there's some stuff there that's just like, man, I'm not even sure what that means. There's a spiritual component there that I don't fully understand. So yes, that story bothers me. And I think, last thing I'll say, that one of the reasons that we've had all these disclosures and all of these, 10 whistleblowers at this point, and it hasn't really become front page news. Part of it's suppression. Parts of the government don't want you to know about it, but part of it is the public can't deal with it. It's too far out. The implications are too profound. And I understand that. Because I've heard things where I'm just like, oh man, I don't even really want to know that, honestly.
Deeply disturbing stuff. Forget like saucers and technology. It's deeply disturbing stuff that I haven't even told Natalie. Yep. I agree with you. It's so disturbing. Exactly. I can't even tell my kids. My kids ask me different stories about it, and I won't say it because it's so dark. It's so dark.
I totally agree.
Miles is watching. So.
Okay, Miles, if you're watching the show, Daddy's not going to tell you about that part of the UFO stuff and what's going on with the government.
Can I say one thing? they've known clearly. I mean, this is, I think, established, and I feel comfortable saying this as fact. The U.S. government, I mean, these are real, whatever they are. They're not human. And the government has known that for a long time, possibly going back to the 1930s at least. And of course, there's tons of evidence in the written record, in the physical record, in paintings, and in literature, that people have been seeing and interacting with these things for a long time. So we know that. But the justification one often hears is, well, the government, various presidents who have been read in, not all have been, haven't wanted to disclose this because it would scare people. And I've always thought that's bullshit. You're hiding a crime, which they are, by the way, in my opinion. But I do think there's a sense in which that's not totally crazy. Like, there is some stuff, if it's true, and I'm kind of thinking it may be true, that's so radical that, yeah, well, as we both said, we don't want to tell the people we love most about it because, like, why would you, disturb someone like that? So I kind of get that. I hate to admit it. I'm not arguing for hiding things. I believe in the truth and I believe in disclosure, but I understand the impulse. Like, holy smokes, this is heavy. You know what I mean?
And the government's involvement in it makes it even heavier because then you realize the complicity.
Exactly.
Of it. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the same thing. I can tell. Okay.
Yeah,
excuse me.
Should
I go?
No. This is what we used to talk about in commercial breaks all the time. This is the kind of stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, so at the time, I never would have believed any of that. But now I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't get you out of here on this, Tucker, which is you've covered politics a long time, and I trust your instincts on this subject more than just about anyone on this subject that I personally know. I've said on this show that I don't think that the deep state, when I say the deep state, I mean the permanent government, the people that are there long after the people that are elected come and go.
For sure.
The deep state will not let Trump become president. That's my own personal belief. Neocons, of course, are lining up behind Nikki Haley. You see the press coverage, the Associated Press. You see the mainstream media, the military-industrial complex wants Nikki Haley. Of course, they want to continue to make a lot of money. Biden is a walking vegetable. What do you see happening in 2024? What do your political instincts tell you from having covered this your whole life?
I mean, it's opaque. It's like looking through a shower curtain. You can only see outlines. And I'm not bragging, but one of my few skills is I've called most races pretty accurately because they're pretty obvious. The outlines are obvious years in advance. And certainly a year out, they're very obvious. In this case, it seems irresolvable. So you have, basically every power center in the country will do anything to prevent Trump from winning. Anything. I mean, that's the most important thing to them, is to keep Trump from becoming president again. Now, why is that? Is a whole separate and very interesting conversation, but that's just a fact, okay? And these are the same people who are lecturing us about democracy. We're saving democracy. Democracy dies in darkness. Democracy is the most important thing. You heard that creepy defense contractor say what we're really doing is preserving democracy. We're not just like selling weapons. We're preserving democracy,
right.
Which was a nauseating clip, and I hope on some level he's punished for that. But anyway, but then at the same time you have Trump is leading the race in every nonpartisan, or all the liberal polls are showing him leading the race, beating Joe Biden in the battleground states. So they can't let him win, but if they don't let him win, then it's just super obvious that all this democracy stuff was fraudulent and that it's not a democracy, it's an oligarchy run by the richest people, that Bernie Sanders, back when he was a free man, was telling the truth. And so at that point, the veil's off. We can't pretend anymore. Like when they killed Kennedy, which they did, they could kind of pretend like everything's fine. But after this election, there's no pretending everything's fine. Everyone will know. And it is a little bit like you get kidnapped, you get thrown in the back of the car, and all of a sudden the kidnapper turns around and lowers his mask and you see his face. And that's not a good thing. Because once you see his face, he has to kill you. Because you know who he is. He can't let you go then, okay? So you sort of want the kidnapper to keep his mask on because the pretense allows him the freedom to let you go in the end, to pretend everything's fine. But they've showed us who they are with such unmistakable clarity that I kind of don't know how we get along after this election unless they decelerate and just do what they should do, which is look, we don't like Trump, here's why. We don't think he's good for the country, here's why. We think Joe Biden's great, here's why. America, make your choice. But I don't think they are going to do that. They're morally obligated to do that, but they won't. And it's incumbent on them to do that. Stop charging them with bullshit crimes that your own people skate on. Like, that's the truth. Stop that. Just let the election happen. Let's have a free and fair election for the first time in a while since 2016. And if they allowed that to happen, I think the country would get better. And then if Trump is a crappy president, okay, we survived it the first time. He's not very radical, actually. He's pretty moderate. We'll be fine. But I think they're too hysterical to allow that to happen. And so I'm very worried about it.
Yeah, it's incredibly troubling what's about to happen in this next year. Well, I want you to tell us, before you get out of here, Tucker, tell us about the network. How does it work? So Tucker Carlson Network. I mean, this is amazing. They call you up. They say, we'd like you to come in for a job interview. We've seen your work at the Tucker Carlson Network. You seem like a good fit. You have a name that fits with our network. We'd like to hire you as like the face of our network. And I think it's a great fit.
The things I had to do to get the job. I was young. I needed the money. It was not just a casting couch. It was a casting waterbed. And I'm not proud of it, but whatever. The past is gone. We can't relive it. You just go to tuckercarlson.com. It's like any other. I mean, a lot of our content will appear with no charge at all, continue to appear on X, and others will appear in truncated form. But there's going to be a lot of content. We're doing a ton of documentaries, going around the world, talk to a bunch of different really, really interesting people, and then, we're just doing what we've always done, which is interviews with people who are saying things that aren't allowed to be said in other places, but that we think are true. And the only promise I guess I would make about it is I can't promise we'll never be wrong. I've certainly been wrong before. Probably we'll do so again, unfortunately, but we will never lie. No lying. So it's going to be as honest as a news organization has ever been. And I'm fanatical about that because I think it's the right thing to do, but I also think it's the source of strength. I think if you keep telling the truth, not just in public, but also in private, you become stronger, and I think people can feel that, and they back off when they know that you're committed to telling the truth.
Yes,
it's one of my quirky beliefs, but it's sincere.
But your superpower is not giving a shit when people hit at you. And Clayton learned a lot from that, actually, because, you guys at commercial breaks, I would say, how does he take that? Or he said that on the air, and they wrote this about him, and you were literally like, I don't give an F, I don't look at it.
Yeah,
and so
it's been an inspiration.
The harder they try, the less it penetrates your superhuman shield. And I think that that's something we all can take away. So that for that reason, you were always a great influence on my husband. Also, you made us have a third baby.
You.
So I'll always thank you for that.
Aren't you glad you did?
I am. Yeah, people don't know that when Tucker and Clayton worked together, we had two, and he came home every weekend and was like, Tucker said we got to have this third one. And I was like, he doesn't have to carry it. And we did.
We did.
Yeah. So because Tucker was on the bandwagon that we needed to have this
family. We need family. We need to procreate. We need more procreation in the United States.
And then there was Eve.
Yeah.
So the first and the last woman in the family. Yeah.
Well,
I love that.
First woman of the world, last woman of our family.
Well, Tucker, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I know you're a very busy man these days. I'm sure you're pulled in 80 different directions. So we're thankful of the time, and we really appreciate it. And congrats. When we heard the news and about the launch of the network, we're really excited. I think it's going to be fantastic for free speech and for getting unvarnished truth out there that in a way that we probably haven't seen before.